Okay, so now we know what a game loop is and we know the basics of what XNA looks like. Let's try to start to do something. We'll do the most basic thing possible. We'll output some text on the screen. This is where we started in the course with basic output. We're going to do the same thing, but now we're doing everything graphically. So we're going to start to use things in here that we haven't used yet, but we did slightly discuss, the Sprite Batch. We'll come back to this in just 1 second. So the first step we need to do is we need to create our font. Alright, so we need to create a font that we want to actually display the text as. So just like in Microsoft Word or any type of text editor, you can usually set up a font, things like the size of the text, the actual font style of the text, that kind of thing. To do this, what we need to do is we need to right click on our content section over here. So this one is called Intro Demo Content because the name of my class or my project itself is called Intro Demo. So I'm just going to right click on this. And I'm going to choose Add New Item. Now what I want to do here is I'm not adding a new image or anything like that. What I am going to add, that's for graphics when you want to actually display images on your game later on. What I do want to do is click on Visual C#, and I want to create a new sprite font. So you'll see right now I've selected it and it's given it its basic name. We're going to leave the extension .SpriteFont. For now though, we're going to change the name of it. Again, same naming rules apply. We want to use mixed case, and we want to make sure there's no spaces. So I'm just going to call this demo font because I'm using it for demos right now. And I'm going to click Add. And what you'll see is it'll pop up over in the Solution Explorer underneath my references, demo font.SpriteFont. So now I officially have my font added to the project. I haven't actually used it yet. You'll notice as soon as I added it though, it added the file into my tab view over here. So now I can start modifying what the font looks like. The two main things that you're really going to care about are the font name. So this is any name you want, or any font type you want, any font style. Now you have to spell this correctly, otherwise it's going to default to a font that you're not going to like. So me personally, my favorite font is Century Gothic. So I'm going to just overwrite this with Century Gothic. And I'm going to bump up the size. Let's bump it up to say 35 point font. Now there's other things down here as well. There you got your spacing, kerning, style. So do you want regular, do you want bold, do you want italic, all these kinds of things. You see there's comments for every piece here. So if you don't know what it is, just read the comments and you should be just fine. Right? If you're wondering what in the world is this written in, it's written in XML, which is very similar to HTML. It's a markup language. It's just a scripting language that C# and XNA use to actually interpret the font that we're creating. So once you're happy with that, we can save our stuff by clicking the Save All, and we can go back to the game. Now the thing is, we have added the font to our project, but we actually haven't actually used it yet within our program. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a global variable that we're going to use to store a reference to that font so we can use it within our program. So to do that, right inside of here, and the reason why I'm using it or creating it as global because I plan on using it in multiple locations. So otherwise I could create it locally if I only planned on using it in one, but right now I plan on using multiple. So this is a brand new variable, and the data type for this variable is SpriteFont with a capital S and a capital F. So right? You can see it actually starts to come up. So that's my data type. Now the name, I'm just going to keep it a simple name right now, so I'm just going to call it test font. And I'm going to leave it like that. So that's all I've done right now, is I've just created a variable for it. I haven't assigned that variable yet. That's coming up very soon. So once we've actually created the font, we need to now load that font. So we have a reference to it in our project. We have a variable to attach that reference, but we haven't actually attached it yet. So we're going to do that in the load content section because we're going to be loading the font. So we're going down to the load content. We're going to go right below that to do here. And the thing is, whenever you want to load any type of content into your software, into your game, you're going to use a very similar command for almost everything. So whether that is an image, or whether that is a sprite font, whether that is a movie, whatever it is, you're going to use almost the exact same code. In this case, I'm going to be loading a sprite font, and I'm going to store the result of the load in the test font variable I just created. So test font equals. Now I need to load the actual font. So to do this, we're using the same comment that we're going to use for all of our loading. Content dot load. Now you see these two little blue angled, or these angled brackets here. What it wants me to do is say, hey, what kind of thing are you loading? We are actually going to load a sprite font. And I'm going to close those brackets. Now, you might be loading other types of things later on, like sounds and images and all that kind of stuff. And what you're going to be doing is essentially you'll replace SpriteFont with whatever type of thing you're loading. What that does is it tells XNA how to properly load it. All right, because every file type has its own way of, or its own setup and structure. So XNA needs to know how to properly load it in so it gets everything it needs to get. Now, the next thing we need to do is specify, well, I know I'm loading a sprite font, but which sprite font? So over here inside our brackets, we're going to specify which one. In quotes, I'm going to write demo font. I don't need the extension. I'm just going to write demo font. This is the same for all things that you load, whether it's an image or whatever. Say, for example, it was like ball.jpg. You wouldn't need the .jpg. You would just need ball. So now that I've loaded that, I've now loaded it into our program. I can start to use it. Well, almost. Before we can start to use it, I want to show you one thing. In graphics, in most programming languages and in most systems and setups that are graphical, whether that is or in terms of like programming, our coordinate system is a little different than, say, your math class. In your math class, where do you think of the origin as? Well, typically you think of it being in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, because that's where we're looking. Now, in graphical games and whatnot, the origin is not in the bottom left. In fact, it's in the top left. So that means when we run our program here, just one second, up here, just in this top corner, just where my mouse disappears, that is 0, 0. X equals 0, Y equals 0. As I move to the right, X increases till I get to the very edge. Now this window by default is 800 pixels by 600 pixels. So that means 800 is right in this corner. So this value is 800, 0. X equals 800, Y equals 0. Y increases as we go down. This is where things get confusing. Most people think, that doesn't make sense. Why doesn't Y increase when we go up? Well, for these graphical programs, Y increases as we go down. So that means that the maximum point in our programs, in terms of both scale, both coordinates, is the bottom right-hand corner. And in this case, that will be 800, 600. X equals 800, Y equals 600. If we want it right dead center of the screen, we'd have to divide those values by 2. So essentially, we'd have 400 by 300. X equals 400, Y equals 300. Right, so that's how the coordinate system works for XNA and most graphical programs itself. So you just need to understand that before we get into the next portion. Just going to close that off. And now we're going to set up some stuff inside of the draw. But before that, I'm going to create a variable. The thing is, we need to know where we want to write our text. Whatever the text is, we need to put it in a certain location. So to do this, we need to set up something that recognizes both an X and a Y value. XNA has a variable data type called a vector2. And what vector2 means is that it can store both an X and a Y. So I'm going to create a new variable of type vector2. Oops. Vector2. And I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to call this text location. And now I need to give it some starting values. So I'm going to say equals new vector 2. And you'll see when I open up my brackets, I have 3 options. This is the one we're looking at, X and Y. Now you see that data type float. Float is pretty much exactly the same as a double, only it only takes up about half the amount of memory. But it also is slightly less precise, but it's fine for our purposes. So it can handle decimal places as well as negative values. Now what we're going to do right here is we're going to give a text location just off the top of our head here. Let's put it at 100 pixels to the left or to the right, and let's say 250 pixels down. So x equals 100, y equals 250. So I've now created my text location. So now using that text location, I want to draw my text on the screen. So down in the draw code, right here, above base.draw but below the to do, what we need to do is we set up what we call a collection of drawing commands. And what actually happens is XNA will say, okay, you want to draw this, 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 and this, and this. I'm going to draw them in some magical off-screen screen, and then I'm going to put them all together as one image and just draw the one image, as opposed to doing a whole bunch of draw commands, which takes up valuable CPU time. So it handles it off-screen and then just kind of throws it on there. Okay, so to do this, what we need to do is we need to create like a batch. Think of it like a batch of cookies, each cookie being its own draw command. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw using the Sprite Batch, that variable that we saw at the very beginning. That Sprite Batch is that batch of cookies. So in order to do that, we need to set up the beginning and the end of the Sprite Batch. So to do this, we're just going to write Sprite Batch dot begin. And then after that, I'm going to say Sprite Batch dot end. Now any draw command that we put in between here will be drawn to the screen every time the screen updates. So here I'm going to write Sprite Batch dot draw string. So we know what a string is, it's just text. And when I open my brackets, we'll see I have 6 options, one of 6 options. We're going to use the most basic option, which requires, as we see here, a sprite font, text, the text we want to show, a position in the form of a vector 2, and a color. So, sprite font. Well, that's the font that we've been working with the whole time. We called it test font. So now we are finally using that font. What text we want to show? Well, let's just keep it simple. Let's say hello world. We could really type whatever we want though. And then the vector 2, the position. Well, we just created that a second ago. We called it text location. Now inside of here, we just need a color. So I'm going to say color dot, and now I have all these options. So I'm going to use color dot black just so it shows up simple. That's it. That's all there is to it. So we set up the beginning of the Sprite Batch, we set up the end of the Sprite Batch, and we could have this drawn multiple times. So let's. Now the problem is we would need a different text location. We could have as many of these commands as we want, but if they're all drawn on the same location, it means they're going to be drawn over top of one another. So I'm just going to delete this for now, and we're going to run the program to see what our results are. Hello world. There it is. Plain as day, exactly where we expected it. 100 pixels over from the left and 250 pixels down from the top. So where is that talking about? Well, imagine an imaginary box drawn around hello world. Just an imaginary rectangle. The X and Y location of 100, 250 represents the top left-hand corner of that box. So the origin of the box, just like the origin of our screen is in the top left-hand corner. So can we do anything special with this other than display text? Well, we could do things like move that text around. So inside of our update, we could modify our text location. So how about this? Let's create a couple variables. Let's create these, let's say, let's say this, int text x, which is equal to 100, and int text y, which is equal to 250. All right. Inside of our update code, right down here, let's add a little change. Let's say text x is equal to text x plus 5. So we're increasing x by 5. And let's say text y is equal to text y plus 3. Now we are going to change our text location variable. So text location dot x is equal to text x. So we're modifying the current value of the current x value of text location to that variable we just set up. And we're going to do the same thing with the text location y. Dot y is equal to text y. Now when we run our program, let's see what happens. Hello world has now moved and it ran right off the screen. Now that's because we were adding 3 to y each time. Let's try subtracting 3. Watch the difference. We see now it moves in the completely opposite vertical direction. So we were subtracting 3, so it was going towards 0. So what we've seen here is we're able to draw text, we're able to place it on the screen, and now using the update and the draw together, remember, the data is separate from the graphics. The graphics we never changed. We didn't change the actual draw command. I didn't tell it to draw in a different location in this command. All I did was change the values, the data that the draw command uses to draw the actual graphics on the screen. And that is the basics of SpriteFonts.